CEO mocked black mechanic. Fix this engine and I'll marry you. Then he actually did. The words cut through the luxury showroom like a blade through silk. Fix this engine, and I'll marry you right here. Alexander Whitmore's voice dripped with mockery as he gestured toward the smoking Bugatti Veyron, its $3 million worth of precision engineering reduced to an expensive paperweight in the center of his private collection garage. His Princeton alumni ring caught the overhead lights as he snapped his fingers inches from her face, the sound sharp enough to make two dealership employees flinch. Nina Hayes stood motionless, her oil-stained coveralls a stark contrast to the marble floors and chrome displays surrounding her. At 28, she'd learned to recognize that particular tone, the one wealthy men used when they were certain you'd fail. Her dark hands, calloused from years of work that these people would never understand, remained steady at her sides despite the earthquake of attention focused on her. When you can't fix it, Alexander continued, his Italian leather shoes clicking against polished stone as he circled her like a predator, and you won't be able to, security will escort you out. Permanently. And I'll make sure every high-end garage in Los Angeles knows exactly why. The showroom had fallen into the kind of silence that precedes disasters. 50 feet of gleaming supercars, from Ferraris to McLarens, bore witness to this corporate theater. Alexander's business partners, 3 men in suits that cost more than Nina's annual rent, watched with expressions ranging from amusement to barely concealed discomfort. Nina had been called to Whitmore Automotive Group's flagship location under false pretenses. The service manager, desperate after 6 master mechanics had failed to diagnose the Bugatti's mysterious engine failure, had tracked her down through underground racing circles where her reputation preceded her credentials. What he hadn't mentioned was that Alexander Whitmore himself would be present, or that this would become a public execution of her career. Alexander Whitmore had built his automotive empire on 3 things: inherited wealth, ruthless business acumen, and an unwavering belief in the superiority of credentials over capability. At 35, he commanded respect through intimidation, his Harvard MBA displayed prominently in every office, his family name opening doors that talent alone never could. The automotive world knew him as a visionary. His employees whispered different words behind closed doors. But what Alexander didn't know about Nina Hayes would change everything about this moment, this day, and ultimately, his entire carefully constructed life. The Bugatti represented more than mechanical failure. It belonged to a Saudi prince who'd flown it from Dubai specifically for the Los Angeles Concours d'Elegance, the most prestigious automotive showcase on the West Coast. The event was 3 days away. If the car didn't perform, Whitmore Automotive Group would lose not just a client, but reputation damage that money couldn't repair. 6 mechanics, each with decades of experience and certifications from Stuttgart to Maranello, had spent 2 weeks chasing ghosts in the engine bay. The car would start, run for exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, then die with the same cryptic error code that no diagnostic computer could interpret. Temperature sensors showed normal. Fuel systems checked perfect. Timing was exact. Yet something fundamental was wrong, something that defied conventional diagnosis. Alexander's frustration had evolved into rage, then into this moment of cruel theater. He'd watched his father build Whitmore Automotive through precision and perfectionism. Now, facing his first major crisis since assuming control, he was willing to blame anyone, especially someone who looked like they didn't belong in his world of chrome and leather. "I'm waiting," Alexander said, checking his Patek Philippe watch with theatrical impatience. "Either prove you're worth the rumors I've heard about some miracle mechanic from the street racing scene, or admit you're just another pretender who got lucky working on cheap Honda engines." Nina's eyes met his for the first time since entering the showroom. There was no anger in her gaze, no desperation. Just the quiet confidence of someone who'd been underestimated her entire life and had stopped caring about proving herself to people who'd never understand. 4 hours, she said simply. Her voice carried clearly through the showroom's acoustics, steady as a heartbeat. "That's all I need." Alexander's smile sharpened. "You have too. And when you fail, which you will, remember that you chose this humiliation yourself." What neither of them knew yet was that this moment would become legend in Los Angeles automotive circles. Not because of the Bugatti, though that would be spectacular enough. Not because of the wedding that would follow, though that would shock an entire industry. But because of what Nina would reveal about the engine, about herself, and about the dangerous assumption that credentials matter more than capability. The real story was about to begin. 15 years earlier, in a garage on the wrong side of Detroit, a different conversation had taken place. One that would echo through time to this precise moment in a Los Angeles showroom where oil stains met marble floors. If you're wondering how a street mechanic ended up facing down a billionaire CEO in the most expensive showroom in California, subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next would prove that sometimes the most valuable expertise comes wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and that the loudest voices aren't always the wisest ones. Nina knelt beside the Bugatti, her fingers hovering above the engine bay without touching anything yet. The 6 failed mechanics had left their mark everywhere, diagnostic ports still connected, pressure gauges dangling like medical tubes from a dying patient, handwritten notes taped to various components documenting their unsuccessful theories. Alexander positioned himself where his business partners could see his performance, arms crossed in a posture of absolute certainty. His phone was already recording, no doubt planning to share this failure across his social media following of 500,000 automotive enthusiasts who hung on his every word about luxury and excellence. The clock started 10 minutes ago, he announced, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone watching their prejudices confirmed. You've wasted time staring. Maybe you're realizing this isn't some street racer's Nissan you can patch with duct tape and hope. Nina ignored him. Her attention had shifted to something the other mechanics had overlooked, something so obvious that its very visibility had made it invisible. The engine bay was too clean. Someone had detailed it recently, probably trying to impress the Saudi prince. But in doing so, they'd removed something critical. The past that led Nina to this moment began in a Detroit garage that smelled of oil and possibility. Her father, James Hayes, had been a legend in underground racing circles before a crash ended his career when Nina was 13. But those years before the accident had been her education, watching him diagnose problems that left certified mechanics baffled. An engine tells you everything, James would say, his hands moving across components with the gentleness of a musician tuning an instrument. But only if you know its language. And that language isn't in any manual they teach in fancy schools. After the crash left James with injuries that ended his racing but not his knowledge, he'd poured everything into teaching Nina. Not because she was his daughter, but because she had the gift, the ability to hear what engines were saying beneath their mechanical symphony. By 16, she was diagnosing problems that grown men with certifications couldn't solve. By 20, she'd earned a reputation that transcended her age, her gender, and every assumption people made when they saw her. But reputation in underground circles meant nothing to people like Alexander Whitmore, who measured worth in degrees from prestigious universities and apprenticeships at European manufacturers. To him, Nina was a curiosity at best, a fraud at worst. 90 minutes left, Alexander called out, checking his watch again. His business partners had pulled out their own phones, documenting what they clearly expected to be an entertaining failure. One of them, a silver-haired man named Richard Chun who owned a chain of luxury dealerships, was already composing what looked like a social media post. Nina stood up suddenly, turning to face Alexander with an expression that made him pause mid-smirk. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. When was the last time this car was detailed? The question caught him off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Answer the question. Something in her tone, the absolute certainty behind it, made Alexander's confident facade crack slightly. 2 days ago. We wanted it perfect for the prince's arrival. What does that matter? Nina nodded slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind with the precision of a perfectly timed engine. And the detailer used what? Steam cleaning? Degreaser. Top-of-the-line products. The best money can buy. Alexander's voice had shifted from mockery to defensive irritation. Why are you wasting time with these irrelevant questions? Because, Nina said, moving back to the engine bay with purpose, your detailer just cost you 2 weeks of diagnostic work. This isn't an engine problem. It's a sensor problem disguised as an engine problem. She pointed to a small component near the engine's intake manifold, barely visible among the maze of high-tech systems. This sensor monitors air density for the engine's adaptive performance system. It's coated with a special compound that responds to microscopic particles in the air. Your detailer's chemicals stripped that coating clean off. Alexander stepped closer despite himself, his certainty beginning to waver. That's impossible. 6 master mechanics looked at every sensor. They ran diagnostics on everything. They ran computer diagnostics, Nina corrected. But this sensor doesn't fail in a way computers can detect. It just sends slightly wrong information, enough to make the engine's AI think it's running in conditions it's not. So the AI compensates, overcorrects, and eventually shuts down the engine to prevent damage that isn't actually happening. She pulled out her own phone, scrolling to a technical document she'd saved months ago. Bugatti issued a service bulletin about this exact problem 6 months ago. It only affects Veyrons that have been stored in controlled environments and then detailed with industrial-grade chemicals. The sensor coating degrades, but so slowly that regular diagnostic equipment doesn't catch it because it's measuring what the sensor reports, not what the sensor actually experiences. Richard Chun moved closer, his earlier amusement replaced by professional interest. As someone who'd owned dealerships for 30 years, he recognized genuine expertise when he heard it. How do you know about a bulletin from 6 months ago? Because I read every technical document I can find, Nina replied simply. Not for school credit or certification points. Because engines matter to me more than pieces of paper saying I'm qualified to work on them. Alexander's face had gone through several shades of emotion, from skepticism to recognition to something that might have been embarrassment. He pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly. Then his expression changed completely as he found the bulletin Nina mentioned. The fix, Nina continued, is either replacing the sensor with a redesigned version that doesn't have the coating, or reapplying the coating yourself with a specific compound that Bugatti supplies to authorized dealers. I'm guessing you haven't received that compound yet because your dealership focuses on sales, not deep technical service work. The showroom had grown quiet again, but this time the silence carried different weight. Alexander's business partners were no longer smirking. The service manager, who'd been watching from a distance, looked like he'd witnessed a miracle. However, Nina said, and everyone leaned in slightly, I can't fix this in 2 hours. Not the way it should be fixed. Alexander's moment of uncertainty crystallized back into triumph. So you admit you can't do it. I knew this was all theater. I didn't say I can't fix it, Nina corrected calmly. I said I can't fix it properly in 2 hours. But I can bypass the sensor temporarily, reprogram the engine's AI to ignore that data input, and make this car run perfectly for the Concours d'Elegance. It'll give you 3 days, maybe 4, before you'll need the proper repair. But it'll run. She looked directly at Alexander, her gaze steady and unafraid. The question is whether you trust me enough to let me try. Because once I start making changes to the AI programming, there's no going back to the way it is now. Either I fix it, or the engine becomes completely non-functional until Bugatti themselves flies someone from France to reset everything. This was the moment. The decision point where Alexander Whitmore's entire worldview would either be confirmed or shattered. His wealth, his education, his certainty about how the world worked, all of it balanced against the quiet confidence of a woman he'd mocked minutes ago. Richard Chun stepped forward before Alexander could respond. Let her work. I've been in this industry 30 years. And what she just explained matches everything I know about these high-end European systems. She's either exactly what the rumors say, or she's the best con artist I've ever met. Either way, I want to see what happens. Alexander's jaw clenched. His pride warred with pragmatism, his assumptions battling against the growing realization that maybe possibly, he'd made a terrible mistake. The Saudi prince's Bugatti sat between them like a $3 million judge, waiting for his decision. Fine, he said finally, the word seeming to physically pain him. You have 2 hours. But when you fail and destroy this engine in the process, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here today. Nina didn't respond to the threat. She was already moving, pulling tools from her worn bag with the confidence of someone who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. Her hands moved with practiced precision, accessing the engine's computer systems through a diagnostic port that the previous mechanics had apparently never thought to use in quite this way. But what Alexander couldn't see from his position of inherited certainty, was the slight smile that crossed Nina's face as her fingers found their rhythm on the keyboard. She'd dealt with men like him her entire life. The difference was, this time the whole world would see what happened when assumptions met reality. Nina's fingers moved across the diagnostic laptop with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, her eyes scanning lines of code that would look like hieroglyphics to most people. The Bugatti's AI system was one of the most sophisticated automotive computers ever designed, with 17 interconnected modules that communicated in microseconds, adjusting everything from fuel injection to suspension stiffness based on thousands of data points per second. Alexander stood close enough to watch but far enough to maintain his authority, His arms still crossed, though his posture had shifted from confident mockery to tense observation. His business partners had formed a semicircle around the car, their phones now recording not anticipated failure but something potentially remarkable. "What exactly are you doing?" Alexander asked after 15 minutes of watching Nina work in focused silence. "Rewriting the engine management protocols," Nina replied without looking up. "The AI is designed to cross-reference data from multiple sensors to verify accuracy. When one sensor gives bad data, the others should compensate. But this particular sensor is classified as critical reliability in the system architecture, which means the AI trusts it more than it should." She pulled up a screen showing cascading numbers and charts. "See this? Every time the engine runs, the AI is getting conflicting information. The air density sensor says one thing, but the oxygen sensors, temperature monitors, and pressure gauges are all saying something different. The AI tries to find a middle ground, but eventually decides the safest option is to shut everything down to prevent damage." Richard Chun leaned in, his professional interest fully engaged now. "So you're downgrading that sensor's priority in the decision matrix?" "Not exactly," Nina said, her fingers still moving. "If I just downgrade it, the AI might ignore actual problems later. What I'm doing is creating an adaptive filter that looks at the rate of change in the sensor's readings. If it's reporting stable bad data, the AI will recognize that as a calibration error rather than a real environmental change. But if the data suddenly spikes or drops, indicating an actual problem, the AI will still respond." She paused, looking at Alexander directly. "It's a more elegant solution than just bypassing the sensor, but it requires understanding how the Bugatti engineers think, how they prioritize safety versus performance. Most mechanics would just disconnect the sensor and hope for the best." "And you learned this where?" Alexander's voice carried genuine curiosity now, the mockery fading. "What school teaches Bugatti AI architecture?" "No school," Nina answered, returning to her work. "I learned it the same way I learned everything else. By studying, by practicing, by taking apart systems and understanding how they work. My father used to say that engines are just metal and electronics having a conversation. If you listen long enough, you start to understand what they're saying." The mention of her father brought memories flooding back. James Hayes in his wheelchair, his racing days ended but his knowledge infinite, spending hours teaching Nina not just the technical aspects of engines but the philosophy behind them. "Anyone can follow a repair manual," he told her during one late-night session in their garage when she was 17. "That's not mechanics, that's just reading instructions. Real mechanics understand why the manual says what it says. They understand the compromises the engineers made, the problems they were trying to solve, the limitations they were working within." He'd rolled his wheelchair closer to the engine they were rebuilding, a 1967 Mustang that everyone else had declared beyond salvation. When you work on a car, you're having a conversation with everyone who designed it, everyone who built it, everyone who maintained it before you. Their choices, their mistakes, their genius, it's all there waiting to be discovered. But only if you're willing to listen. That philosophy had guided Nina through every challenge, every dismissal, every moment when someone assumed her gender or her appearance meant she couldn't possibly understand the machine she loved. While other mechanics relied on diagnostic computers to tell them what was wrong, Nina had learned to combine technology with intuition, data with understanding. 45 minutes left, Alexander announced, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. He'd watched her work with a focus and precision that contradicted everything he'd assumed about her. The casual confidence with which she navigated systems that his certified mechanics couldn't diagnose had begun to create cracks in his worldview. Nina pulled back from the laptop, stretching her fingers. "The programming is done. Now comes the critical part, testing whether my solution actually works." "Wait," said Thomas, one of Alexander's business partners who'd been silent until now. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with the calculating eyes of someone who'd built his own fortune rather than inherited it. "Before you start the engine, explain something to me. Why didn't the 6 other mechanics figure this out? These weren't kids fresh out of school. These were master technicians with decades of experience." Nina considered the question carefully. Because they were looking for complex problems. When you work on $3 million cars, you assume the issues will be equally sophisticated. A simple sensor coding problem doesn't fit that narrative. Plus, they were relying entirely on computer diagnostics, and the computer can only tell you what it's programmed to measure. She gestured toward the engine bay. But there's another reason. Every single one of those mechanics was trained in traditional systems. They learned on conventional engines and adapted to newer technology. They think in terms of mechanical problems first, electronic issues second. This car is the opposite. It's an AI system that happens to control a mechanical engine. The thinking has to be reversed. And you learned this how? Thomas pressed. If you didn't go to any fancy schools, didn't do apprenticeships at European manufacturers, where did this knowledge come from? Underground racing, Nina said simply. When you're building cars that push every system beyond factory specifications, when you're modifying AI computers to do things the manufacturers never intended, you learn these systems in ways that traditional mechanics never will. You learn by breaking things, by fixing what you broke, by understanding not just what the engineers wanted the car to do, but what the car is actually capable of doing. Alexander's expression had become unreadable. Something was shifting in his understanding, though whether it would translate into respect or simply fuel his resentment remained unclear. Nina moved to the driver's seat, her hand hovering over the start button. This is the moment. Either my analysis was correct and the programming worked, or we're about to make this situation significantly worse. The showroom held its breath. Alexander's recording phone captured every second. Richard Chun had pulled out a notebook, actually writing observations by hand like someone witnessing something worth remembering. Before I do this, Nina said, turning to look directly at Alexander, I want everyone to be clear about something. If this works, it's not luck. It's not some magical intuition. It's the result of thousands of hours of study, practice, and dedication to understanding these machines at a level that goes beyond what any certification can measure. She pressed the start button. The Bugatti's 16-cylinder engine roared to life with a sound that made everyone in the showroom feel it in their chest. But more importantly, it stayed running. The dashboard's warning lights, which had been flashing error codes for 2 weeks, went dark one by one. The engine settled into a smooth idle that resonated with mechanical perfection. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 3. The 4-minute 17-second mark, where the engine had consistently failed, approached like a judgment. Alexander's hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Thomas was holding his breath. Richard Chen's pen had stopped moving. 4 minutes. 4:17. 4:30. The engine purred like a satisfied cat, every system functioning exactly as Bugatti's engineers had intended. 5 minutes. 6. 7. The diagnostic computer screen showed nothing but green indicators, perfect readings across every measured parameter. Nina let the engine run for a full 10 minutes before switching it off. The silence that followed felt profound, weighted with implications that extended far beyond a repaired car. It worked, Thomas said quietly, as if afraid to break the spell. You actually fixed it. I told you I could, Nina replied, climbing out of the driver's seat. The question was never whether I had the ability. The question was whether anyone would give me the chance to prove it. She looked at Alexander, whose face had gone through a remarkable journey of emotions in the past 2 hours. The contempt had evaporated. The certainty had crumbled. What remained was something more complex, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that his assumptions about the world might need serious revision. The car will run perfectly for the Concours d'Elegance, Nina said, gathering her tools. After that, you'll need to order the proper sensor replacement from Bugatti and have it installed correctly. I can do it, or you can have one of your certified mechanics handle it. Your choice. Alexander finally found his voice. How much do I owe you? We agreed on terms already, Nina said, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You said if I fixed it, you'd marry me. I fixed it. The showroom erupted in shocked laughter from the business partners. Alexander's face went through several shades of red. That was obviously a joke. A figure of speech. I'm not actually going to. A man's word used to mean something, Nina interrupted, her tone light but her eyes serious. Especially a man who lectures others about honor and reputation in business. But I'll tell you what. Instead of the marriage, how about you do something that actually matters? She pulled a business card from her pocket, placing it on the Bugatti's hood. I know at least 50 mechanics, most of them women, most of them people of color, who are more talented than half your certified staff but can't get hired at places like this because they don't have the right credentials or the right look. You want to settle your debt? Start giving people chances based on what they can do, not what their resume says. Alexander picked up the card slowly, staring at it as if it contained instructions for disarming a bomb. His entire worldview was being challenged, not with arguments or theories, but with undeniable proof that he'd been wrong about something fundamental. I'll think about it, he said finally, the words clearly difficult to produce. You do that, Nina said, slinging her tool bag over her shoulder. And while you're thinking, remember that you were ready to humiliate me, ban me from every garage in Los Angeles, and destroy my reputation, all because I didn't fit your idea of what a qualified mechanic looks like. She headed toward the showroom exit, her worn coveralls and oil-stained hands a stark contrast to the marble and chrome surrounding her. But her posture, her confidence, the undeniable proof of her expertise, transformed those markers of working-class reality into badges of authentic honor. Wait, Alexander called out, surprising himself as much as everyone else. I need to know something. Why did you take this job? You had to know I was going to be difficult. You had to know this was set up for you to fail. Nina paused at the door, considering whether to answer. Finally, she turned back. Because every time someone like you tells me I can't do something, and I prove you wrong, it makes it a little bit easier for the next woman, the next person of color, the next self-taught genius who doesn't fit your narrow definition of qualified. I do it so that someday, someone like me won't have to. The door closed behind her, leaving Alexander Whitmore standing in his showroom surrounded by $3 million worth of automotive perfection that a woman he'd mocked had just saved. His phone was still recording, capturing every word of what had just happened. What Alexander didn't know was that this wasn't the end of their story. It was barely the beginning. Because the video he'd started recording as proof of Nina's failure was about to become something very different, something that would force him to choose between his pride and a growing realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd met someone who could teach him what true excellence actually looked like. The video went viral within 6 hours. Alexander had uploaded it to his social media that evening, intending to provide context, to explain what had happened, to somehow maintain control of a narrative that had already escaped him. Instead, the automotive community exploded with reactions that ranged from celebration to scalding criticism of everything Alexander represented. CEO humiliated by woman he mocked read one headline. Street mechanic solves problem elite technicians couldn't declared another. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times, shared across every automotive forum and social media platform, dissected frame by people who understood exactly what they were witnessing. Nina's phone began ringing at 6 in the morning, 2 days after the showroom incident. Job offers from luxury dealerships across California. Interview requests from automotive magazines. An invitation to speak at the Society of Automotive Engineers conference. Messages from mechanics she'd never met, thanking her for proving what they'd always known but couldn't demonstrate. But the most unexpected call came from Richard Chun. I need to talk to you about Alexander, he said without preamble. He's been locked in his office for 36 hours. Won't talk to anyone, won't respond to messages. I'm worried he's going to do something destructive. Nina sat in her small apartment, surrounded by the tools and manuals that had been her constant companions for years. Why are you telling me this? Because despite what you probably think, Alexander isn't a bad person. He's a product of a system that taught him the wrong lessons about what matters. And right now, watching that video replay millions of times, seeing comment after comment pointing out everything he did wrong, he's having to confront something he's never faced before, being completely, undeniably wrong about something fundamental. That's not my problem, Nina said, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, Richard agreed. But I watched you in that showroom. You could have been cruel when you had the chance. You could have humiliated him the way he tried to humiliate you. Instead, you gave him an out, asked him to do something meaningful. That tells me you understand something important about people. Nina ended the call without committing to anything, but Richard's words stayed with her as she went about her day. She understood pride, understood what it felt like to have your identity challenged at its core. Her father had taught her that winning didn't mean destroying your opponent, it meant proving that a better way existed. The Los Angeles Concours d'Elegance arrived like a deadline. The Saudi prince's Bugatti performed flawlessly, drawing crowds and admiration, its engine running with the precision that only perfect diagnosis and repair could achieve. Alexander attended, professionally courteous to the prince, but his usual confident presence had been replaced by something more subdued. Nina was there too, Not as a guest but as a working mechanic, hired by 3 other owners who tracked her down after seeing the viral video. She worked quietly in the service area, aware that Alexander watched her from a distance but never approached. It was after the event, as the sun set over the Los Angeles skyline, that he finally found the courage to speak to her. Nina was packing her tools when Alexander's shadow fell across her workbench. "The Bugatti ran perfectly," he said without preamble. The prince was impressed. "He's recommending Whitmore Automotive to his entire circle." "Good," Nina replied, not looking up from her tool organization. "That's what you wanted." "I owe you an apology," Alexander said, the words clearly difficult to produce. "Not just for what I said in the showroom, but for every assumption I made, every barrier I've maintained, every qualified person I've dismissed because they didn't fit my narrow definition of excellence." Nina stopped working, finally looking at him. His expensive suit was slightly wrinkled, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress. But more than that, his eyes carried something she hadn't seen before: genuine humility. "I've spent the last 3 days reading everything I can find about automotive education, about talent development, about the barriers that exist in this industry," Alexander continued. "And I've realized that I've been part of the problem. Not just passively, but actively." He pulled out his phone, showing Nina something he'd been working on. "I'm creating a scholarship program. Full funding for people from underrepresented backgrounds who want to work in automotive technology. No credential requirements, just demonstrated passion and ability. And I want you to help me design it." Nina studied the preliminary proposal on his screen. It was thoughtful, comprehensive, addressing real barriers rather than offering token gestures. "This is a good start," she acknowledged. "But scholarships aren't enough. The industry needs to change how it evaluates talent, how it defines qualification." "I know," Alexander said. "That's why I'm also changing our hiring practices at Whitmore Automotive. From now on, every candidate gets a practical skills assessment before we look at their resume. Prove you can do the work, then we'll talk about where you learned it." He paused, struggling with what to say next. "I also wanted to tell you that I'm honoring the original agreement. Not the marriage," he added quickly, seeing Nina's expression, "but something that actually matters. I'm offering you a position as our Director of Technical Innovation. Design your own department, hire your own team, focus on solving the problems that traditional approaches can't handle. Full equity stake in the company." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond employment. Nina could see the calculation behind it: Alexander trying to transform his public humiliation into a redemption story. But she could also see something genuine struggling to emerge, a man confronting the limitations of everything he'd been taught to value. "I need to think about it," Nina said finally. "This isn't just about a job. It's about whether real change is possible, or whether this is just damage control that'll fade when the viral video is forgotten." "I understand," Alexander said. "But while you're deciding, I want you to know something. Watching you work, seeing the way you understood that engine at a level I couldn't comprehend despite all my education, it changed something fundamental in how I see the world. You didn't just fix a car. You fixed my broken understanding of what expertise actually looks like." He extended his hand, a formal gesture that carried new meaning. "I was wrong about you. Completely, embarrassingly wrong. And I'm grateful that you proved it, even though it cost me my pride." Nina shook his hand, feeling the calluses on her palm meet the softness of his. Two different worlds, two different paths, connected by a moment of truth that neither had anticipated. "I'll give you my answer in a week," she said. "But know this: if I accept, it won't be to make you feel better about what happened. It'll be because I believe real change is possible, and that this industry needs people who understand that talent comes from places you've been taught not to look." Alexander nodded, accepting the terms. "That's all I can ask." As he walked away, Nina returned to her tools, but her mind was already working through possibilities. The viral video had opened doors she'd never expected. The question was whether she'd walk through them into Alexander's world, or forge her own path on her own terms. What neither of them realized yet was that the video had been seen by someone else, someone whose decision would transform this story from viral sensation into something that would reshape the industry itself. The president of the Society of Automotive Engineers, Dr. Patricia Morrison, had been watching. And she had plans that would make Alexander's offer look small by comparison. But that revelation would come later. For now, Nina packed her tools and headed home to the small apartment where her father's legacy lived in every manual, every lesson, every moment of hard-won expertise that no institution had granted her permission to possess. She'd proven what she'd always known. The question was what she'd do with that proof. 6 months later, Nina stood in front of 300 automotive engineers at the Society of Automotive Engineers annual conference in Detroit. The city where her father had taught her everything, where their small garage had been her university, where dreams had been built with calloused hands and unstoppable determination. Dr. Patricia Morrison had offered her the keynote speech slot after seeing the viral video, but more importantly, after investigating Nina's background and discovering a trail of solved problems, fixed impossibilities, and quiet expertise that had been invisible to everyone who measured worth by credentials alone. Alexander sat in the third row, no longer the arrogant CEO from that showroom confrontation. He'd spent 6 months implementing real changes at Whitmore Automotive, hiring 12 mechanics from non-traditional backgrounds, creating assessment protocols that valued capability over pedigree. The industry had noticed, some with approval, others with skepticism about whether his transformation would last. Nina had accepted his job offer, but on her terms. She'd built a technical innovation department that became legendary within months, solving problems that had stumped engineering teams across the industry. Her team looked nothing like traditional automotive departments, women and men of every background, self-taught experts working alongside career engineers, proving daily that excellence emerged from unexpected places. But more than the job, something else had developed between Nina and Alexander. Respect had evolved into friendship into something neither had anticipated. He'd learned to listen to engines the way she did, to see beyond credentials into capability. She discovered that people could change when confronted with undeniable truth, that pride could transform into humility when given the right catalyst. The wedding everyone joked about had become real, not because of a mocking bet, but because two people from completely different worlds had found common ground in a shared commitment to changing an industry that desperately needed transformation. "My father used to say that engines don't lie," Nina told the assembled engineers, her voice carrying through the conference hall's acoustics. "They tell you everything you need to know, but only if you're willing to listen without the filter of assumptions about who deserves to understand them." She clicked to the next slide, showing the viral video that had brought them all here. 6 months ago, a man made a bet he thought he couldn't lose. Fix an engine that elite mechanics couldn't repair, and he'd marry me. He said it to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to confirm everything he believed about who belonged in his world of luxury and expertise. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Many had seen the video, but hearing her tell the story directly carried different weight. "I fixed that engine. Not through luck or magic, but through thousands of hours of study that no institution certified, expertise that no degree program validated, understanding that came from loving these machines more than I loved comfort or acceptance or fitting into boxes that were never designed for people who looked like me." Alexander watched her with an expression that had become familiar over the past months, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, the look of someone who discovered that the world was larger and more complex than he'd been taught to see. "But this story isn't about me proving someone wrong," Nina continued. "It's about an industry that's been measuring the wrong things, valuing credentials over capability, pedigree over performance, assumptions over evidence. How many brilliant mechanics never got their chance because they didn't have the right school on their resume? How many problems went unsolved because we weren't looking for solutions in the right places?" She gestured toward her team, seated together in the front rows. "These people are the future of automotive excellence. Not because they have impressive credentials, though some do, but because they've proven through their work, through solved problems and fixed impossibilities, that expertise comes from dedication, passion, and the willingness to listen to what machines are actually telling us." Dr. Morrison stood to make an announcement that would surprise everyone except the few who'd been told in advance. The Society of Automotive Engineers is creating the Hayes Fellowship, named after Nina's father, James Hayes. It will provide funding, mentorship, and industry access to aspiring mechanics from non-traditional backgrounds. Nina will direct the program, and Whitmore Automotive will be the first of what we hope will be many industry partners. The applause was thunderous. Alexander stood, joined by others, a standing ovation that acknowledged not just Nina's achievement but a commitment to changing how an entire industry identified and developed talent. After the speech, as the conference hall emptied, Alexander found Nina standing near the stage, looking at a photograph she'd brought, her father in his garage, tools in hand, the Detroit street visible through the open bay door. He would have been proud, Alexander said quietly. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've used it to open doors for others. Nina smiled, touching the photograph gently. He taught me that fixing engines was never just about the machines. It was about understanding that everyone, deserves to be seen for what they truly are, not what assumptions make them appear to be. She turned to Alexander, this man who tried to humiliate her and instead had his entire worldview dismantled and rebuilt. You've changed. Really changed. I didn't think that was possible. Neither did I, Alexander admitted. But you showed me that being wrong isn't weakness. Staying wrong when confronted with truth, that's the real failure. I was wrong about you, about talent, about what matters. And being forced to face that was the best thing that ever happened to me. He pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a ring that made Nina laugh. The band was made from a piece of titanium engine component, polished and crafted into something beautiful, a symbol that merged their worlds rather than denying either. I promised I'd marry you if you fixed that engine, Alexander said. It was meant as cruelty. But maybe it was the universe's way of teaching me that the most important things in life come from places we're trained not to look, from people we're taught to underestimate, from moments when our certainty is shattered by undeniable truth. Nina took the ring, examining the craftsmanship, the way something industrial had been transformed into something personal. Yes, she said simply. But not because of a bet. Because you proved that people can learn, can change, can become better than the sum of their assumptions. The wedding took place 3 months later in that same Detroit garage where James Hayes had taught his daughter that engines don't lie, that truth reveals itself to those willing to listen, that expertise comes from dedication rather than permission. Alexander's business partners attended, alongside Nina's team of non-traditional mechanics, a gathering that would have been impossible a year earlier, two worlds finally learning to speak the same language. The Hayes Fellowship changed hundreds of lives in its first year, giving chances to people who'd been told they didn't belong, proving repeatedly that talent existed in places the industry had never thought to look. Whitmore Automotive became the standard for inclusive excellence, not through tokens or gestures, but through a fundamental transformation in how value was measured. But perhaps the most important change was smaller, more personal. Every evening, Alexander and Nina would spend an hour in their garage, working on whatever project needed attention, their conversations mixing technical details with philosophy, expertise with humility, the marriage of different worlds creating something neither could have built alone. Listen, Nina would say, her hand on an engine, teaching Alexander the language her father had taught her. It's trying to tell you something. The question is whether you're willing to hear it. And Alexander, who'd once believed that credentials mattered more than capability, that pedigree counted more than performance, would close his eyes and listen, learning that the most valuable lessons often came from the most unexpected teachers. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you didn't belong, subscribe to the channel. Share your story in the comments. Because every time someone proves that excellence comes from dedication rather than permission, it becomes a little easier for the next person who doesn't fit the conventional mold. The world changes one fixed engine, one open mind, one challenged assumption at a time. And sometimes, the bet made in mockery becomes the catalyst for transformation that reshapes entire industries, proving that the best victories aren't about destruction, they're about building something better than existed before.